What if the first thing the flood erased wasn't a city, wasn't a coastline, wasn't even a civilization? What if it erased memory itself? 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose over 100 meters. Entire continental shelves disappeared. Every coastal settlement would have gone first. And yet, we search for the beginning of civilization on dry land. History tells us civilization begins suddenly. Agriculture appears, astronomy appears, monumental stone appears. But what if that wasn't the beginning? What if it was what survived? Why does early civilization look prepared? Why does knowledge appear mid-sentence? Across cultures, one story repeats. Water rises, the world ends, a few survive. They carry something forward. If the Great Flood erased a civilization, what would be left for us to find? The last ice age did not end gently. Vast glaciers covered entire regions of the northern hemisphere. Then, in a geological instant, temperatures surged. Massive ice sheets collapsed into the ocean. Sea levels rose more than 100 meters. Land that once stretched hundreds of miles outward vanished. And early humans did not live deep inland. They lived on fertile coastlines. Today, those coastlines are underwater. If complex settlements existed there, they would have been erased first. And yet we search for the origin of civilization, where the water never reached. We are looking in the wrong place. The flood was not a myth. It was a geological transition, and civilization appears immediately after. The question is not whether the flood happened. The question is what existed before it. We assume the first civilizations began where we find them. On dry land, in river valleys. But today's coastline is not the coastline of 12,000 years ago. Vast plains once existed where ocean now stands. These regions were fertile, stable, resource-rich, exactly where complex societies would thrive. And exactly where rising seas would erase them. Most of the ancient coastline is now underwater, and we have barely explored it. More than 70% of Earth's surface is ocean, yet nearly all early civilization research happens on dry land. We are searching for coastal civilizations, in places the coast no longer exists. So when we say, there is no evidence, the more precise question might be, where are we looking? For hundreds of thousands of years, humans live as hunter-gatherers. Then within a narrow window of time, agriculture appears, permanent settlements appear, writing appears, astronomy appears, monumental architecture appears, all at once. Before this, there's almost nothing. No gradual scaffolding, no visible prototypes, no obvious learning curve. Burial rituals already imply cosmology. Agriculture implies seasonal knowledge. Astronomy implies long-term observation. Long-term observation requires generations. So why does it look like civilization begins mid-sentence, as if something came before, and we are reading only what survived? What if what we call the beginning is actually the restart? When we look at the earliest monumental structures, we do not see improvisation. We see coordination. Blocks weighing tens of tons, cut with controlled surfaces, aligned with celestial events. Solstices, equinoxes, these are not decorative choices. They reflect measurement. And measurement requires standardization. Standardization requires shared systems. Shared systems require organization. And astronomical alignment requires time. Years of observation. Possibly generations. And yet these structures appear at the dawn of recorded history. Already refined, already coordinated. Already refined, already coordinated. This is not primitive experimentation. This is execution. The question is not whether they could do this. The question is how long they had been preparing to. And what knowledge may have existed before these stones were ever raised. When technology develops, it leaves a trail. Crude versions, failed versions, transitional forms, experimentation. So where are they? Where are the early failed attempts? Where are the rough drafts? Why does refinement appear? Before visible development, archaeology is not silent. It usually shows progression. But here, the progression feels compressed, as if we are seeing the result, but not the beginning. If early experimentation happened, it may not be buried, it may be submerged. If the flood erased coastal centers, then what we call the beginning may simply be what survived. If this line of thinking makes you uncomfortable, good, because it means you're thinking. Subscribe if you want to follow this investigation all the way down. And comment below. Do you think we're missing evidence? Or looking in the wrong place? Look at the sky long enough, and patterns begin to emerge. Solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, and something slower, almost invisible. The slow wobble of Earth's axis, a cycle that takes roughly 26,000 years. No single lifetime can observe it completely. It requires inheritance. It requires recording. It requires continuity. When early civilizations align monuments to the sky, they demonstrate accumulated observation. Yet these alignments appear at the dawn of recorded history. So where did the observations begin? On land we can no longer see. If knowledge survived the flood, it would survive through people. And inheritance leaves fewer ruins than cities do when catastrophe strikes. Not everything can be carried forward. Cities fall. Infrastructure vanishes. But stories travel. Across distant culture, one structure repeats. world ends. A few survive. They carry knowledge. Myths are compression algorithms. They preserve pattern, not detail. They encode events in narrative form. So memory survives even when writing does not. Flood narratives appear fully formed. In the earliest layers of recorded culture. Already ancient. If a pre-flood civilization existed, it would not leave intact libraries. It would leave stories. Stories that compress geography into metaphor. The question is not whether the flood stories are literal, the question is what memory they are protecting. When systems collapse, knowledge does not disappear instantly. It condenses into people. Across cultures after the flood, figures appear. They teach agriculture. They teach measurement. They teach timekeeping. They teach order over generations. These teachers become myth. Human memory becomes legend, but transmission remains practical. How to plant, how to track seasons, how to measure land. If a coastal civilization collapsed, the people furthest inland would inherit fragments, not full systems. This would create a strange effect. Civilization would appear already informed, not because it invented everything, but because it remembered enough. We think of oceans as barriers, but for most of human history, the sea was a highway. During the Ice Age, coastlines extended far beyond today's shores. Entire plains connected regions now separated. Travel between these regions required only navigation and astronomy. The sky guided our direction. Over centuries, a silent network formed, not centralized, but deeply connected. Small cultures exchanging ideas and tools, symbols and measurement systems echoed across the waves. Then the water rose, the great network collapsed. The nodes of our ancestors were lost to the deep. Only fragments survived, scattered far inland. What once felt connected now feels separate and forgotten. What we call the birth of civilization may have been the rebuilding of isolated fragments from a lost global world. The pattern remains, waiting to be found again. When we imagine advanced civilizations, we imagine scale, expansion, acceleration. But advancement can mean something else. Alignment, synchronization, integration with environment. A civilization optimized for stability would build to endure, not to expand endlessly. If the pre-flood world was stable for thousands of years, it may have optimized for balance, and sudden change breaks stable systems first, not because they were weak, but because they were optimized for a world that disappeared. Advancement increases dependency. Dependency increases fragility. So maybe the question isn't whether they were more advanced than us. Maybe the question is whether they were optimized for a different world, and whether we are optimized for ours. If you're still here, you're thinking beyond headlines. Subscribe to follow this reset series, because the next part connects this pattern to today. And comment below, do you think civilization collapses because it's weak, or because it becomes too optimized? Civilizations do not collapse because they are primitive. They collapse because they become complex. Complexity creates interdependence. Energy depends on supply chains. Supply chains depend on stability. Food depends on climate. And stability is never permanent. 12,000 years ago, a rapid environmental shift reset the map. Not because people forgot how to build, but because the environment changed faster than systems could adapt. When complexity is optimized, it removes redundancy. Redundancy is resilience. Across history, complexity rises, peaks, and then compresses. What follows feels like a beginning, but it is often a restart. Each cycle inherits fragments, never the full system. If the flood erased a coastal network, then complexity was reset. The question is not whether collapse can happen. It is how optimized we are when it does. After collapse, not everything is preserved. Records are lost. Rebuilding requires focus. Food, order, complex systems are simplified. Technical knowledge becomes ritual. Procedure becomes symbol, and story replaces instruction. This is not deception. It is stabilization. Institutions emerge to protect coherence. They select what must endure. Some stories are elevated, others fade quietly. Over generations, simplification feels natural. A new beginning is declared, and whatever came before feels mythic, not because it was false, but because it was incomplete. History does not always erase the past. Sometimes it compresses it. There is a reason this idea feels uncomfortable, not because it sounds impossible, but because it sounds familiar. 12,000 years ago, coastlines disappeared. Today, most of our largest cities sit on coasts. Our systems are more interconnected than ever, more efficient, and less redundant. If a civilization before us reached stability, it may have felt permanent, as ours does. The fear is not that they were greater. The fear is that they were similar, that they faced acceleration, and assumed adaptation would keep pace. Remembering too much collapses distance. It makes the past feel like rehearsal. If civilization is cyclical, then we are not at the end of history. We are somewhere in the middle, and the middle is unstable. The flood is not just water, it is acceleration. It is complexity outrunning resilience. The reason remembering feels dangerous is because it removes the illusion of permanence, and permanence is what modern civilization depends on. If they misjudged their stability, what makes us certain we haven't? Today, Sea levels are rising again, slowly. Then suddenly, our world runs on interdependence. Food, energy, information, all synchronized, and synchronization removes redundancy. If a coastal network once existed, it likely believed in its own stability, as we do. The threshold is rarely visible, until it has already been crossed. Complexity makes us powerful. It also makes us fragile. If civilization is cyclical, then collapse is not punishment. It is correction. The world before the flood may not have failed. It may have simply been optimized for a world that changed too quickly. If sea levels continue to rise, if supply chains strain, if systems accelerate beyond resilience, will future generations see our cities the way we see theirs? If a civilization before us once believed it was permanent, what makes us certain we are different? If this series made you think deeper than headlines, subscribe and comment below. Are we witnessing the beginning of a collapse, or just another cycle in a pattern older than memory?